Welcome back. The United States is preparing for a major boom in the domestic use of unmanned aerial vehicles. As the wars in Iraq and Afghanistan wind down, drone technology is readily available more than ever in the U.S. In February of this year, President Obama signed a law that makes it easier for the government to fly remotely piloted aircraft inside the country. The U.S. Federal Aviation Administration has already given permission to police, government agencies, and research institutions to fly drones. Supporters point to numerous domestic applications such as agriculture, energy exploration, traffic control, and drug interdiction. Opponents say drones will threaten the privacy rights of Americans and could turn the U.S. into a surveillance state. Joining me now is political activist Medea Benjamin, a co-founder of the anti-war group Code Pink. She opposes the use of drones both inside and outside the United States. Also with me here in the studio is retired U.S. Air Force Colonel Cedric Leighton. He also served as a Deputy Director of Training at the National Security Agency in 2010. Welcome to The Heat.
Thanks so much.
Colonel, why don't I start with you, because you've been involved in these kind of discussions in the past. Why do you think the President signed off on domestic drones?
When it comes to drones, the basic lesson that the military has learned from it is that it is much more efficient to have drones, just from a pure business standpoint, pure dollars and cents standpoint, more efficient to have drones working than to have manned aerial vehicles doing the job. You can save on pilots, you can save in some ways on air traffic control costs, as long as you have the proper infrastructure to handle it. And that's then the big question, whether or not we'll have the proper infrastructure from an air traffic control standpoint to actually really have a system of drones that are viable and that do things such as, look at crops, look at irrigation issues, things of that nature, protect the border, law enforcement issues. There are all kinds of possibilities there, and that's really what it's about. It's about efficiencies.
So, Medea, this can be a great savings to taxpayers. Why aren't you in favor of this?
I'm sure the taxpayers will save so much money. No, this is another toy, and it's the drone industry. Big lobby, lots of money. They pay off our Congress people, in case your viewers don't know how the U.S. system works. And the Congress people then pass legislation that opens up the field for more sales of these toys. And since the wars are winding down in Iraq and Afghanistan, the drone industry is quickly looking for where to sell these, and the domestic market is one of them.
One of the questions, though, that does come up, and I'm wondering if you're thinking a lot about this, is the personal liberties issue. There are people who are concerned that these things can be hovering around outside, not to watch you and help you, but to watch and spy on you.
Sure, that's always a possibility, and that's something that has to be really controlled. There have to be, the whole legal system has to be in place, laws have to be in place to prevent that kind of thing from happening. But then you look at what happened in the age of the airplane, where, in World War I, the airplane was used as an offensive tool, first for reconnaissance purposes and then for bombing purposes. But then everybody uses the airplane, and it has become a commercially viable area to deal with, a machine that is used for all kinds of purposes. And so you have to control it, you have to understand what you're dealing with, you have to understand all the technological implications. But that's where Congress has to come in and make sure that the laws are in place to deal with that, so that our civil liberties are protected in a way that is acceptable to the American people.
Is that a concern of yours, the civil liberties issue?
I mean, drones is just a piece of technology. It can be used for good purposes, but my fear is that it is going to be used for spying, and it is going to be used perhaps to use stun batons and other crowd control kind of things. And since I tend to be in crowds a lot as an activist, and since the government has spied on my organization, that's just a peace group, I have good reason for concern. And there's one other thing, and some people might say, oh, she's crazy, but I've seen that drones have been used overseas to kill Americans. And when the head of the FBI was at a hearing in Congress and was asked, can drones be used to kill people here at home, he said, oh, I'm not sure about that. So I think we have reason to be worried about whether we might see people being killed in the United States with drones as well.
Well, I think that's a huge step forward, but there are talks about perhaps, well, I mean, well, backwards, yes, of course. But I mean, there is talk, though, I have heard talk, that perhaps these could be equipped with tasers or tear gas. And this really kind of gets at the heart of somebody who does protest quite a bit. Where do you think the limitations should come in? What kind of strict laws should be passed in terms of the limitations on how we use these drones?
Well, I think it's really, there has to be a national dialogue dialogue on exactly how we use these instruments of technology. And when you look at the way drones have been implemented in wars as well as in other more peaceful pursuits, you have to look and see what is technically feasible and what isn't. But in terms of protecting civil liberties, I think everybody agrees that those need to be protected. And you have to, when it comes to what can and cannot be done by a law enforcement agency, for example, like a police force or the Border Patrol in the United States or something like that, you have to give them very, very strict guidelines and say you can use this for surveillance purposes, but you cannot use it as an example, to actually attack people. You cannot use it as a killing machine. But what you can do is you can use it in a way that allows you to determine who is there. If you, let's say you're on the border and you're with Mexico and you're looking at who's coming in from Mexico as either a drug runner or as an illegal alien or something like that, you need to be able to look at that and say, okay, this is a surveillance tool, not an occupational tool, not something that will go in and actually mow people down or do anything like that.
Let me invite you in on this, because I would think you have some thoughts on this. I mean, we've seen the Patriot Act, when people start talking about border patrol, and all of a sudden you start to think about profiling, all of these kinds of things, which I imagine are issues that you're concerned about. Very
much so, and we've already seen how police departments and the FBI have been spying on people like groups like peace groups, environmental groups, people in the Muslim community, in the black community, and we're worried about that on a bigger scale. We're worried about a surveillance society that's a 24/7 kind of thing. And I agree that the American people need to be brought into this discussion, that the federal...
Do you think they are, though? I mean, no, are they asleep at the switch?
Totally asleep. And one of the things that scares me is that the Federal Aviation Administration, which is the entity that's been in charge of giving out permits, has refused to even disclose to the public who's gotten those permits and had to be sued to start releasing that information. So I think we're off to a bad start.
Isn't that a bad sign, though, right off the bat?
The FAA has some really key technological hurdles to overcome before they allow the actual physical overflight by drones of a large portion of the country. I mean, they're obviously being used on test ranges and things like that, but it is, to get them to be allowed to have drones flying for local law enforcement purposes, for example, that is a whole nother step, and it becomes very important that the laws are done in such a way that they really protect the citizenry from excessive overwatch, but also protect the state.
We're already seeing Miami-Dade police using it, other police departments using it. How long before it just spreads across the country like wildfire?
Well, that's our concern, and the legislation that was recently passed forces the FAA to quickly open up the airspace to commercial drones and, of course, to government agencies. And there are, I don't know how many tens of thousands of police departments are there in this country. Everyone's going to want a drone. And the Department of Homeland Security is taking our tax dollars and giving it to these police departments to get them addicted to this technology. So it's being pushed, and I have great fears about who's going to use them and how they're going to be used.
And pretty soon, won't it be the case where if I want to spy on my neighbor, I can too? Because pretty soon they're going to be everywhere, aren't they?
Well, actually, you can already do that with model airplanes.
Yes, and up to 400 feet, you're allowed to have your own personal drone. I bought one in the store, and so yes, you could spy
start spying on him?
I don't know where he lives yet, but I can find out probably.
It won't be hard.
Now, I do have to ask you, we showed you earlier in the piece where you stood up and, when Brennan was speaking. What happened after you were arrested there?
I was handcuffed and I was taken to a police questioning office in that building and questioned to make sure that I wasn't crazy, maybe, I don't know, and then I was released.
Do you think you're making any headway in persuading people to start thinking more about drones and the possibilities where it could go?
I think there is suddenly a tremendous interest, and this has just come out very recently because there's been a spate of reports about drone use both at home and overseas, and people are starting to make the connections between the killing spree of the CIA overseas and the drones coming home to haunt us here.
Okay, I'm going to leave you with Franklin's quote. You've heard it a million times. I want to get your response to it. He says, "Those who would give up essential liberty to purchase a little temporary safety deserve neither liberty nor nor safety. This really is kind of the ultimate question here, isn't it?
Well, what you have to do is you have to look at the trade-off between safety and security on one side and liberty on the other. And it becomes very important to make sure that as a nation that believes in freedom, that believes in individual rights, that we always protect those rights. But by the same token, we want to make sure that we harness the technology that's out there for good purposes, and that's where, if we use drones properly, such as in areas where we protect crops, get better imagery of areas that have drought, for example, things of that nature, that can then be a much better use of this technology than anything that drones have seen so far. So it becomes very, very important that we as a nation look in a way to make sure that our liberties are safeguarded so that we can use drones and other technologies of a similar type in a way that protects everybody.
We're going to have to leave it there. Colonel Leighton, thank you so much for coming in. Medea Benjamin, was a delight talking to both of you. Appreciate it.
Thank you, Mike, so much.
All right.